All right, as far as crazy stories go, consider this new report. Late last month, executives from the left-leaning Washington Post apparently met with the Republican National Committee about hosting a future Republican presidential debate. Of course, the Democracy Dies in Darkness paper has been anything but fair to Republicans, but I digress. The lead executive of the Washington Post, publisher Fred Ryan, then convened a second meeting on the exact same topic, but in a vastly different role. Not as the Washington Post publisher, but in his other position as chairman of the board of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library, which has been a favored site for Republican debates. So as a potential conflict of interest at play. Joining us now to share their thoughts is our company, Tim Graham, executive editor at Newsbusters, and Stacy Washington, host of Stacy on the Right. Good to see you both. Tim, so here's the thing that I think is interesting. Semaphore, Ben Smith at Semaphore reported this exclusively this morning. I want to make sure I give him credit. He notes that there's obviously a major conflict here, right? So Fred Ryan, who's the publisher of the Washington Post, goes in with his team. He pitches this debate that they want to host, which is nuts, and then says when it's done, he tells his team, go downstairs, I want to have a second meeting. How is that not a conflict of interest?
Yeah, it's not plausible, and I think that there are so many Republican voters now who would say to the Republican National Committee, we don't want newspapers that want us destroyed getting into our presidential debates. There should be no presidential debates from any of these badly disguised Democrat networks and newspapers. We are old enough now, we have enough established media that we don't need to have somehow the Washington Post and their goobers who are going to throw mud balls being the moderators of our debates.
Yeah, exactly. Stacy, in 2016, I ran the Republican debates, the first time ever a political party actually put together a structure where the party was in charge. I put that together. I had to deal with Fred Ryan, right? He, at that time, was the head of Politico. And it was interesting because it was a package deal. You got the library and Politico. That was very clear. So while he bifurcated this deal and said, oh, the library is separate, I'm going to have a separate meeting on the library, I'm going to have a separate meeting on the Washington Post, shouldn't it be pretty clear that this is going to be a package deal, that you have to take the Washington Post if you want to go to the Reagan Library?
Well, I mean, I think people are seeing through all of this, Sean. And when you talk about you ran that then, we're years past that and we're still arguing over the same things. The key here is the process has to be one that's transparent so that people can trust it, so that they can actually pay attention to the participants in the debate instead of having all of these grandiose discussions about the people behind it. It's as if they think they're the stars and they're the people that Americans want to see and hear from, and we don't. I don't care about some guy at the Washington Post or what he thinks about things. I want to know that the debate has been set up fairly so I can just observe and actually make a decision about the candidates, and that's what people really care about.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that's the problem, is that they're going to end up with a bunch of Washington Post folks that hate all of the Republican candidates and team them up with a bunch of people from CNN that hate the Republican candidates. And then you're going to have a food fest or a food fight to talk about who hates Republicans more. And it's all going to be sanctioned by the Republican National Committee. And that's a recipe for disaster. But, Tim, I do want to switch gears. Because Gavin Newsom is apparently away from California right now on personal travel amid record snowfall in the state. We've seen all of these stories come out, many residents trapped in their homes without power because of the blizzard-like conditions. It's interesting because no one on the left has said a critical word about this. But let's go back to 2021 when Senator Ted Cruz is in a very similar predicament. He goes off to Cancun, and let's look at how the media unloaded on him. Take a look.
Well, one thing you don't do when you have a statewide crisis like this is go to Cancun.
If Ted Cruz were murdered in the Senate, there wouldn't be a single vote to convict. There are two kinds of people who hate Ted Cruz and Ted Cruz.
What was he thinking?
He was thinking about Ted Cruz. He was thinking about his own hide.
So, Tim, here's the thing. What do you make? I mean, what do you make of that whole? I just find it interesting that there's no criticism here on the left.
Well, this is that field of optics, and it is a great demonstration where you do this Exhibit A and Exhibit B, where, yes, we all know they were hyper aggressive with this tone about somehow if Cruz was murdered, no one would vote to convict. I mean, that's just really nasty stuff, Brian Williams. But Gavin Newsom apparently is the golden boy, and he can do things like that, and nobody minds. I mean, I guess if he was actually an announced candidate against Biden, they might have to pay more attention.
But, Stacy, here's the thing that I think is interesting. At the time, I mean, and still now, Ted Cruz is a United States senator. He couldn't really do that much to help the state of Texas when it was dealing with that energy crisis. Gavin Newsom is the chief executive. He is the governor of California. It's a much different scenario, and yet he's getting no flack.
So you took the words right out of my mouth, Sean. Ted Cruz is a sitting senator. He is concerned with federal issues. Of course, the state of Texas matters to him, and he weighs in on many issues there, but he's not the governor of that state. So the governor of the state, when it comes to weather emergencies, is the one who would call out the National Guard or apply to the federal government for a national disaster declaration. So these are not things that the senator would do. Ted Cruz was well within his right to go on a planned trip to Cancun, and especially during a snowstorm, what better time to head to a warm climate? And lots of people joined him on that trip. I don't mean with him, but I mean there were many people who flew out of Texas during that storm to go to places where they wouldn't have to worry about dealing with it. So this is just more obfuscation by the left. They hate Republicans with so much power, the heat of 1,000 suns, the heat of a volcano, 1,400 degrees. That's the kind of hatred they level at people who disagree with them in a cogent manner like Ted Cruz does. So I tend not to pay any attention to them when they start talking about weather anyway, because they believe in wholehearted climate change, anthropologic global warming, and whatever else they want to call it. But in this case, it's just another instance of their unhinged hatred towards conservatives. And they really make themselves look bad when they do this.
Exactly. Tim, Stacy, thank you both very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sure.